Okay, great. All right, welcome everybody to another one of our 411 Wednesday Second District PTA meetings. Thank you all for being here. This is going to be an endorsement meeting tonight, which we have once in a while when we've got some ballot measures on the local ballot that we might want to consider taking a position on, because that's one of the things that PTA does. In fact, it's the core of what we do, is that we're an advocacy organization. And so that's why we're here tonight. We're going to be hearing presentations on 3 different measures. And before we get to that, I'll just go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Michelle Parker. I'm the Vice President of Legislation for the Second District PTA. What that means is that I support all of you in your advocacy efforts and do sort of centralized advocacy organizing. This is an example of what that will be, one of those things that we do. So whatever happens tonight, what the outcomes are, I will be sharing information and helping you share that information with your schools, which I'll explain more about in just a minute, on how we actually take positions in PTA. And before we get into that bulk of the meeting, I just wanted to share a few announcements. One is that our next 411 meeting next Wednesday on the 9th is going to be supporting all of you and all the stress you're going through. We have a coach who's coming who specializes in coaching parents through stress, and she's going to help us. It's going to be a workshop, a very kind of hands-on. I think we're dividing up into small groups. She's hoping that all of us are able to leave with a few tips on how to make our lives a little less stressful as we're going through distance learning, and supporting our families through that. So that is next week, and it's going to be a little longer than usual. It'll be a 90-minute meeting instead of a 1-hour meeting. We have that event on Facebook, but we'll also send it out through the President's listserv. And then the following week, on the 16th, we are going to have a meeting on PTA fundraising. And so we're going to be looking for some of our PTA leadership across the city to share some of their great ideas. We'll be sharing ideas with you on how to do fundraising at your schools in the middle of this distance situation, because we know that that is a little bit stressful, and none of our schools have enough money, and so we're all doing our best to support each other through this. So that's what that one will be, and then we'll announce upcoming PTA 411 meetings after that, but those are the next 2 coming up. We also need to announce, I think, our PTA officer training that's coming up on September 12th. Carrie, do you know the time on that meeting? Do you want to share? Did we set the time? You're on mute. Carrie, you're on mute.
I think whatever it was in May, which I think was 10 to 12. Does that sound familiar, Ron?
I think probably
Yes,
we'll
yes.
send an email out if we don't know the exact time. I didn't know if you all decided it yesterday. Okay. All right, you're on mute still, Carrie. So we'll go ahead and send an email with the exact time on that. But just know that on September 12th, we'll have a PTA officer training happening. So watch for information on that. Okay. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about how PTA takes positions and what our process is. So you all know that the PTA is a tax exempt organization. We're a 501c3. There is a national PTA, and the national PTA is sort of the umbrella over all the state PTAs. So every state in the country has its own PTA, and then under the state, there's other levels. So there's the district PTA underneath the state. Some district PTAs also have councils underneath that, and then at the most ground level is units, which are all of you, the schools. We call those units in PTA. And so as a 501c3, we can take positions on issues and never on candidates. And in order for us to take a position on an issue, we have to have the authority of our members to do that. And the position must be taken at the appropriate level. So if it's a national issue, some sort of legislation happening at the national level, then the national PTA is the level that takes a position on that issue. If it's a state level issue, for instance, if there is legislation happening in the Assembly or the Senate, or it's a state ballot measure, the California PTA takes positions on that. The Second District PTA will take positions on issues impacting all of San Francisco. So issues like these ballot measures that we're considering tonight, If there was something at the school district level, then the district PTA would take a position on that issue. And if there was something happening affecting just your own school, so something in your local community, something in your own school, you could go through the same process at your own school site. If for some reason there was an issue that, say if the state PTA wasn't going to take a position on a state level issue, but we at the Second District PTA thought that they should, then we can make a request that they consider it, and or they can give us permission to take position on that issue. So that's how the level of who takes positions on what. So PTA authority it's a set of policies and positions that are approved by PTA members. The highest PTA authority is a convention resolution, which is a policy that's voted on by members statewide at the annual state PTA convention. There's usually not more than a couple of resolutions that are considered every year. They go through a pretty extensive vetting process. A lot of research and work goes into those. And then the PTA membership votes on them. And you can find all of those resolutions on the capta.org website in the advocacy section. They go back several decades, so that's our highest authority. We also have position statements and planks and policies that you can also find on that website. And so when an issue comes up that a PTA member would like to take a position on, or a PTA body would like to take a position on, you decide which level it's taken at, and then a study committee is formed, at which time they set to work to identify which PTA authorities support or oppose the particular issue or legislation. And then that analysis is presented in a report to members, and a recommendation is made. And then the members can vote on the recommendation. And so at this point, if that recommendation passes, then the PTA can act on behalf of that issue. So tonight, if we are to vote in support of any of these measures, then any PTA in the city can then act on behalf of that and can advocate for it. So if we were to pass Prop J, for instance, the parcel tax, then that means you could send out emails out to all of your PTA members encouraging them to vote yes on the parcel tax. You could organize phone banking. You could do anything with that is an actual advocacy effort related to that measure. But also PTAs can choose not to do that if they want to. They just can't oppose it once the position is taken at the district level. So that's generally how that works. Are there any questions about how that process works in general? If you do, just raise your hand. I can see you in the participant box, or you can unmute yourself. That's also fine. And just shout out a question, because I want to make sure everybody understands how this process works. And so that's what's happened here. Tonight is that we have formed 3 study committees to consider these 3 measures. And so we had PTA members who reviewed all the authorities and who have written a report, which I sent through the president's listserv this afternoon. So if you wanted to take a look at those, you could, but we will also have presentation by those committees giving the summary of their recommendations and what they found. And then at the very end of this meeting, we will vote on the presentations, on the recommendations. So that's how it works. Once again, we've had some folks who have joined us in the last couple of minutes. I will have you ask you to let us know what school you're from. You can do that by renaming yourself, and you do that by hovering over your image, the 3 dots in the top right hand. If you click on that and click rename, just add which school you are from to your name. And then, or if you are not able to do that for some reason, then just open up the chat box and let us know what school you're from. So and we're doing that because this is official action, we have to have a quorum. And that means we have to have at least 10 schools represented in the vote and at least 17 people voting. So that's what we're going to be looking for when we get to the voting. All right. Okay.
So for the folks that go to Lowell, if you have a child at a different school in a younger grade, we can record that as a different.
Thank you. All right, so yeah, if you're at more than one school, or if you're a member at more than one school, put all the schools you're a member at in your name, because that will help us, because sometimes there's multiple people from a school and they're also a member at a different school that's not represented yet. So that'll help us in keeping track. Okay, so our agenda tonight is we're going to start with a presentation from the Prop F campaign. What we're doing for each of the campaigns who are here tonight is we're going to give them about 4 minutes to make a presentation, and then we'll allow up to 4 minutes for questions and answers that you all can ask. Once they're finished with the presentation, if you have a question, you can either type it in the chat box and I'll catch it for you, or you can raise your hand and ask it live. And so that's what we're looking at there. And then after Prop F, the campaign presentation is over, then I'll have the Prop F study committee give their report, and they'll have 5 minutes to give that report. So that's the structure we're looking at. So let's go ahead and have Liz. Welcome, Liz, for joining. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, and it's nice to meet all of you. I appreciate your time. So again, my name is Liz Winograd, and I work for the Low Income Investment Fund, which is a national community development financial institution. And I work here in California, and I work in the Early Care and Education Division. So I'm here hopefully to better inform you of Proposition F, and help you understand why it's important to vote yes in November. As you all know, San Francisco is facing unprecedented challenges, and to meet those challenges, it's really important that we pass Proposition F. The backbone of San Francisco economy has always been its small businesses. However, COVID has had a devastating impact on our city's small businesses. At least 80 small businesses have permanently shut down between March and July of 2020. And this measure will help with these struggling small businesses in our city. Prop F makes a number of changes to San Francisco's system of business taxes. It's making it fairer while supporting critical city services as we emerge from this pandemic. Further, Prop F will immediately release funding for early care and education. We need to open all of our childcare centers and our family childcare homes in order for parents to return to work. Before this pandemic, San Francisco had 3,000 subsidized children on the wait list, which are still on the wait list. And now the city's capacity for children birth to 5 years old is at 50% due to COVID-19. These funds will also help combat the homelessness crisis and support general city services. So again, these funds were already approved by San Francisco voters when they voted on Proposition C in 2018. But unfortunately, it's tied up in litigation, and so the money is not available. And this proposition will unlock these funds immediately for these services. So now more than ever, we need to pass this proposition immediately, which will again help small businesses and working families while creating the investment that we need for a fair recovery and a stronger, more equitable economy for our future. So it's just a really brief overview. I can give you a few facts. So the entire Board of Supervisors did endorse this, as well as Mayor London Breed. So it was a unanimous vote by the Board of Supervisors and now supported by Mayor Breed. It's going on the November 3rd ballot, so this is really quickly happening, and we are starting our campaigning and fundraising to do all of this. I do understand that when you actually read the ballot, it's pretty complicated, but the impact of passing this proposition is pretty simple. Like I just mentioned, it will immediately provide relief and support for small businesses here in the city, and hopefully, help with recovering from COVID-19. So I'll stop there, and I'll see if hopefully I can answer some of your questions.
Great, thank you, Liz. Does anybody have questions they'd like to ask Liz while she is here? You can go ahead and raise your hand. If you look on the participant box, you'll see an option to raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself and let us know what question you might have for Liz.
I have a question, Melissa from Rosa Parks.
Great.
I'm sorry, I'm not more familiar with this by this point, but so it unlocks funds immediately. So you said for like lower childcare for like.
No, this will help. So right now, so since 2018, they've been holding on to the funds that have been taxed. There is quite a bit of money for sort of just the general funds for city services, for homelessness, and there'll be about, specifically because early education is my expertise, is that we'll have about $700 million for childcare and to combat the homelessness crisis.
And small businesses?
And yeah, and I think there's a little bit more that will go into the general funds for small businesses.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions? And I know, and just while anybody's thinking of a question they may have, I know that one of the reasons why this was brought to us, and this measure was brought to us by a PTA member who wanted us to consider it because of its impact on early education funding, and because it's been stuck and we haven't really been able to, as you just described, unlock the funding. And so just to let you all in this meeting know that that's the background of why it was brought to us, is that we see that need. Is there any other data, Liz, that you can share about early education and childcare that might be also helpful for people to know?
Yeah, so maybe I can sort of also help give a little more to Melissa's question, is that this proposition will make sure that to exempt sectors that have had the hardest hit by the pandemic. So restaurants, retail, manufacturing, arts organizations, and hospitality businesses will see no increases through 2024 under the proposal. So I could tell you a lot about early care and education. Is there? So I mean, we struggle. I mean, the early care and education field in San Francisco, across California, across the country struggles. And so what some of the funds that are in this, that are right now tied up in litigation, that we'll have access to, will help with our workforce. And that has been an issue prior to the pandemic, and it's even a bigger issue now, because we have a lot of teachers in early care and education that are living with family members that are vulnerable to this pandemic. And so obviously being quarantined and not being out and about is pretty serious. So we have a lot of teachers that have not come back. Of course, we have a lot of children that have not come back due to the same reason. But what this will do is it will not only, hopefully soon, hopefully after the pandemic, which will be soon, is that it will open up more spaces. It will also help us sort of increase the reimbursement rate at the city level, sort of close that gap between whether it's Head Start or the California Department of Education, and the city would be able to sort of close that reimbursement gap, and which in turn can increase the salaries of our teachers. I think they're our lowest paying teachers, nowhere near the salaries that our K through 12 teachers are getting. And that will really help us sort of find higher quality early care and education teachers in our community.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Liz, for all of that. I think that that's probably, our time is up for this presentation, but I appreciate that. And then I'm gonna go ahead and ask Ron. I believe, Ron, you're doing the presentation from the study committee, correct?
That's right.
So I'll give you, Ron, you'll have 5 minutes to do this. And could you also include, just to let everybody here in the meeting know, there are not formal opposition campaigns for any of these measures we're presenting tonight. And so, Ron, I'm gonna ask you within your presentation to just list off at least what the opponent arguments might be, so that we're allowing people to see what the other, what opponents might be seeing. that would be great. If you can just list off just briefly as part of your part, that would be great.
And I'm also happy to answer questions if, Michelle, you want to send an email.
Okay.
But yeah, so you don't need me anymore, or would you like me to stay?
I don't think that we need you anymore, but you are welcome to stay. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to sign off, and thank you. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Take
All
good
right.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, well, hello everyone. My name is Ron Rittinger. I'm a proud parent of a Presidio Panther and an Alamo Gator, PTA member at both schools, and I'm also on the Second District board as the auditor. And I was happy to serve on the study committee for Prop F along with Nancy Buffum, another district board member, who couldn't be here tonight because she's celebrating her wedding anniversary, so I'm presenting on her behalf. So our process was to research the proposition and then do a write-up of it with our understanding, and that was in line with what Liz talked about. And then we also researched the backers, the sponsors, and like she said, the Board of Supervisors along with the mayor are supporting it, along with a number of other early child care organizations. And then we did research the opposing view, which is limited to Libertarian Party. We put bullets in the report to talk about why they're opposed. So like Michelle said, I can talk about those right now. And it's mainly about the cumbersome nature of the proposition, the way that it releases the funding and changes the tax rates and the income thresholds for the businesses who pay the taxes. It doesn't agree with changing tax rates during a pandemic. It says that having it be a combined charter amendment and ordinance is also confusing. And while they should be two separate measures, maybe with language that will allow each one to take effect if both of them are passed. So it's a question of timing and then the nature of the way the proposition is written. That's the opposing view. Now, the PTA's way into this was through researching the authorities that we found on the captive website. And Nancy and I identified two position statements or resolutions that have clearly support early childhood education, both from the perspective of access, value, and then the PTA as acting as an advocate for funding. So we have those two statements in our report, and then we highlighted the relevant language that talks about the support for the value of early childhood education and the PTA's role in advocating for access for all, and to fill in gaps that the state cannot, well, the state has a responsibility to provide funding, but the PTA needs to advocate for measures that will improve that. So we found those two authorities and included those in our position statement. So we clearly feel that the PTA does have authority to support this measure. And while it's called this Business Recovery Support Act, the way in for the PTA is really unlocking that funding and freeing up the funds that were already approved back in 2018 with Prop C, and actually making them available for use now.
Great. Thank you, Ron. Does anyone have any questions about the PTA authorities or anything specifically related to the study committee report? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I'll just, while you all are thinking if you have any others, I will let you know that when we get to the end of this meeting and we're voting, one of the other parts of the process when we're taking a position is allowing people to sort of debate the issue. And so before we vote, we will allow on each of these measures for people to speak in support or opposing it. And we'll take up to 3 comments on each side if people would like to. It's not required, but we will take that, you know, just short, like 1-minute comments in support or against when we get to the voting at the end of the meeting. I'm not seeing any hands raised, and I'm not seeing anybody unmuting themselves with questions. So Ron, thank you to you and Nancy for doing the work to research the measure and looking at the PTA authorities. So again, the recommendation from this committee is to support Prop F. And so you can hold on to that, and we'll vote at the end of the meeting. Thanks very much, Ron.
So we're going to vote on all of them at the same time?
Yeah, we're voting all at the end. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we're going to do that because we're not sure if we're going to be doing just sort of an acclamation all here, a live vote, or if we're going to be doing the secret ballot. So we'll just do them all at the end in case, just in case. Okay. So our next presentation is for Prop G, which is the youth voting measure. And we have Rocky is here to present on that. And so, great, he's sharing his screen. All right, thanks Rocky for being here, and take it away.
There we go. So good evening, everyone. My name is Rocky. I'm a UHS senior, and I will be presenting on Prop G, also known as Vote 16, for you all today. So first of all, just a quick summary of what Prop G is. It's a youth-led initiative. It was previously spearheaded by the San Francisco Youth Commission, and it would expand voting rights to include 16 and 17-year-olds in San Francisco municipal elections. This is particularly important right now because we've seen in the past few months and few years actually that San Franciscan young people are making a movement, not just a moment. We're mobilizing right now for Black Lives Matter. Examples of this are the Mission High School youth-led protest and the Golden Gate Bridge youth-led march. And we're also leading in other social justice areas like the climate strike and March for Our Lives. Additionally, young people are actively calling for progressive and accountable policies. And 16 and 17-year-olds need a democratic way to participate, not just a social one. Voting is that solution. Young people are likely to be the most impacted group by COVID-19, with it affecting our education, future employment opportunities, as well as affecting our families' life savings. So being able to get votes will allow us to create the representative city we need. Why expand the voting age? Of course, 16 is a better age to begin voting than 18. Voting is habitual. This has been researched time and time again. And 16 is the better time to establish that habit than 18. The 18-year-olds have a lot of transitions going on in their lives, whether that be entering the workforce for the first time, moving away from home, going to college. And that makes it a challenging time to establish new habits. So voting often falls on the back burner for a lot of 18 to 21-year-olds. An example of this statistic is if you were to see two people walking down the street, one of whom had voted in the last election and one of whom who didn't, the person who voted is 25% more likely to vote in the next election. At age 16, young people are embedded in their communities and often the ones bringing political discussions to the dinner table and informing their parents. And additionally, we have the opportunities in our classrooms to experience civics and government classes in our freshman and sophomore years, which leaves us prepared for acting on those lessons in our junior and senior years. This is also an issue of equity. 16 and 17-year-olds in San Francisco are predominantly people of color, and this means that they are less likely to establish voting habits with our voter disenfranchisement that's going on across the nation. And additionally, 1 in 3 SFUSD students has an immigrant parent. So this means that those families are already not getting the representation that they need at the polls. So we can see young people as acting as a kind of voice for their parents, in addition to representing their communities as a whole. And if you want to take about 5 or 6 seconds to look over the graph, which shows that young people are at a greater minority than their overall San Francisco counterparts. When given the chance, 16 and 17-year-olds prove that they get out and vote. 4 Maryland cities already implemented 16-year-old voting successfully, the most prevalent of which is Tacoma Park, Maryland. And as you can see on the graph here, young people turn out at over twice the rate of their adult counterparts in these elections. We are really motivated to get out and express that we need to vote. Countries around the world, mostly in Europe and South America, already do implement 16-year-old voting. And new research shows that in countries that did switch to 16-year-old voting, overall turnout increased by 5% in the next 20 years. That's a big amount, and it further shows that voting is habitual, and it will affect the older generations to get on their game and start coming out at a higher rate. So currently, Prop G enjoys unanimous support from the Board of Supervisors, as well as 32 community-based organizations, 16 elected officials, multiple political clubs, 2 unions, and a neighborhood association. You can see our main stakeholders below, but there are plenty more. And we are asking that you help us win by endorsing Prop G, including it in your voter slate card and/or voter contact, and support our fundraising efforts if you do choose to support us today. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. I believe Carrie is raising hand.
Sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
Hi. So in your presentation, you mentioned that it would be 16-year-olds would vote in municipal elections, but I was under the impression that it was specifically for school board candidates and city college candidates. Is it for all municipal elections?
It is for all municipal elections. I believe what you might be thinking of is the referendum that just happened in Berkeley. And they did implement voting for school board elections, but this would cover all municipal elections, including supervisorial races, ballot props.
Thank
and
you.
Actually, school board.
Thanks for the clarification.
No problem.
Are there other questions? You can raise your hand, or yeah, why don't you raise your hand? Oh, there we go. Oscar, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I would like to ask two questions at one. One is, how would this ballot be implemented? How long will it take? Because as great as it sounds, we also have to understand the implementation, how long that will take. And then also, will there be any ways on training, or not training, or educating those 16-year-olds to vote and how to do the process and all that?
Absolutely. So currently, the San Francisco Youth Commission, who spearheaded this, its Civic Engagement Committee, of which I am a part of, our budget and policy priorities include acquiring funding to put this in public schools and just get the word out, because all they would really need to be implemented would be voter registration, and that would be it. We would amend the city charter, and there wouldn't really need to be much policy like scuffle, much bureaucratic stuff. It would be that simple. The main part that would require effort is getting the word out and getting people to register. And in terms of funding, that shouldn't be too much of an issue, just because voter registration is not very expensive, especially if it's the young people going out and doing it and not organizations bringing the booze into schools and such. And then to answer your question about, sorry, what was the second question? About
how to prepare the 16-year-olds on to vote and the process and things like that nature. So when they turn 16, they know what they're getting themselves into and how to do the process.
Absolutely. So what we have seen is that a great deal of 16 and 17-year-olds, especially in San Francisco, are already very informed. 75% of them said that they'd be very likely to vote in an election, and 25 said that they'd maybe be likely or like have not decided whether they would vote. And that's across all youth. Additionally, they are taking civics and government classes in SFUSD schools. And if they're not, that means SFUSD is not performing its duty, because it is mandated that they do so. So they already have shown that they do have that level of education to get out there and vote.
Thank you. Do I have other questions? Okay, I am not seeing any. All right, I'm not seeing other questions. So Rocky, thank you so much, and all the work that all of you and your peers on the Youth Commission and other youth across the city have been doing to get this moving. And thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. I am going to go ahead and turn it now over to Kathy Meyer, who has done, she and Nilesh, who I believe is also here, did the PTA study committee on this issue. So Kathy, why don't we turn the time over to you?
Thanks so much.
Hello, everyone. My
Thanks,
name
Rocky.
is Kathy Mulkey-Meyer. I would like to give Nilesh an opportunity to introduce himself as well.
Hi, everyone. Nilesh Bhandari. I've got a student at Lowell and one at Claire Lilienthal. Thank you. Go ahead, Kathy.
Hi, my students actually attend two non-PTA high schools. One is Independence High School and the other one is June Jordan School of Equity. But I am a member of the Golden Gate PTA. We reviewed the legislation, Prop G legislation. Originally in 2016, a ballot measure called Prop F was introduced, and that ballot measure did ask that 16 and 17-year-olds be allowed to vote in Board of Education and City College Board of Trustees elections. This proposition, Prop G, asks that 16 and 17-year-olds be eligible to vote in all municipal elections. We did review California PTA and National PTA authorities, which are resolution statements and position statements, to find specific language supporting the right for 16 and 17-year-old minors to vote, and there was not specific language in any of those authorities. However, there is a lot of language that talks about civic engagement. It also refers to the importance of representation, the importance of stakeholder engagement, and students are definitely stakeholders, especially once they're in high school. California PTA high schools run parent-teacher-student associations, and students have a role on the California PTA Board of Managers. And so the California PTA and local PTAs definitely support the engagement of youth in decision-making about their education. That being said, again, we did not find any specific authorities that support a minor having the right to vote. So I will discuss some of the authorities that we found that support civic engagement. There's a national PTA resolution called Student Involvement in Educational Governance that was adopted in 2014. And it does talk about, as a member of our community, students have substantial interest in our democracy, and their education is no different. With an ever-changing landscape in education, students need to be at the table to ensure that expectation can be met and their voices are heard. We have another California PTA position statement titled Youth Involvement. It was adopted March 2005 and revised October 2010. And the entire authority identifies the inclusion of youth voice as fundamental to California PTA decision-making, as well as the importance of youth engagement in government budgetary and policy decision-making. It states specifically that encouraging legislative bodies at all levels of government to include local youth in their policy-making efforts is one of the subject points. And then there also is another position statement, accountability systems, statewide, federal, and local, which was adopted August 2016. And the following citations from this position statement define accountability. California PTA believes that the primary goal of any accountability system is improved learning for every student. An effective accountability system should incorporate multiple measures, promote continuous improvement, and rely on the shared responsibility and coordination among all participants in governing bodies, and provide transparency and clarity. Shared responsibility, accountability rests on the conviction that improving student learning is a responsibility shared by all participants in the education system, including individuals. For example, students, parents, families, teachers, and organizations, schools, school districts, policy-making bodies, but also by the public and at all levels of government. Therefore, California PTA believes that transparency transparency and clarity. California PTA believes that an accountability system must provide transparency and clarity. Therefore, it should incorporate clear and meaningful communication of local, statewide accountability elements to all stakeholders in the public. And 16 and 17-year-old students are definitely stakeholders in their education. And then there are some other authorities regarding basic education and the right for all students to have a basic education, and that communities understand and agree upon basic elements necessary for one to function as a contributing member in a free and democratic society, and that these elements should interact and be relevant in a changing world. Schools need a balanced curriculum, clear standards for student achievement, qualified and competent teaching, and parents and community involvement. Now, there are also other resolutions that do support stakeholder engagement. And again, students are stakeholders. This being a parent-teacher association, and we do have the authority, should this body decide, to start drafting a resolution that specifically states 16 and 17-year-old students should be engaged in the operation of their government by having voting rights, not just by making phone calls to legislators and being active in their school PTAs and PTSAs. So that is an option for eventually specifically supporting the 16 and 17-year-olds' right to vote. Currently, the California PTA and the National PTA do not have specific language supporting Prop G.
Thanks, Kathy. There, I put the link to the study committee report if you didn't see it earlier in your email. So just to sum up this, the conclusion here was there wasn't specific authority allowing the PTA to take a position. We presented this to the Second District Executive Board last night, and there was consensus that because youth voice and youth civic engagement are so in line with PTA priorities generally, that the Second District PTA would initiate drafting a resolution that we could possibly submit with the approval of our membership once it's drafted, to submit to the state PTA for convention review, so that San Francisco and every other district across the state and every other PTA across the state would have authority in future years to take positions of support of youth voting. So that is something that, you know, is not always an outcome of these sorts of study committees that we have, but it was a very clearly identified missing piece, you know, that it felt that with the kinds of values that we have as a PTA and valuing youth voice, but we just don't have the clear authorities to do so in this case, but that we could help create those authorities for us and for others in the future. And so so we won't be voting to support or oppose this measure tonight, but we do want to open it up to anybody who would be interested in participating in the drafting of that resolution and creating those authorities for us and others to use in the future. So that is the outcome of this committee report. Are there any quick questions before we move on to our last ballot measure for our study committee members? Oscar.
Yes, I want to say thank you. Again, this is my first time joining the meeting.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. When it comes to the resolution in Prop G, I'm just, well, first of all, I'm how do I say, it's definitely a pleasure to see that, you know, voting eligibility and age has encompassed, you know, a younger age population, which is great. At the same time, I do want folks to understand that much of the conversation and the reaching out to communities, informing people about this ballot and 16-year-olds having the right to vote is usually geared towards wealthier neighborhoods. Now, let's just keep it real, because when we look at low-income neighborhoods such as the Bayview, the Mission, this conversation has not been visited towards those neighborhoods. And so those population have been left out. And so let's be real, like I said, when we look at these type of conversations, it's mainly towards the wealthier communities. And so I just want us to be mindful and conscious that there is a huge another population that is being left out who are continuously Black and brown and low income neighborhoods who are not being informed about any of these type of conversations. So I will hopefully that, you know, when we are outreaching and we are talking about ballots and we are talking about, you know, these type of different propositions, that we keep in mind that these other communities needs to be reached out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Oscar. I really appreciate that. And if you would also like to be part of preparing this resolution and some of these efforts, then please let me know, because we'd love to have you and make sure that we have folks who are part of drafting what these things should look like, all working together. So invite you to be part of that if you'd like to.
But I just would like to make a comment that I think Rocky's presentation was outstanding. Like, his slideshow was full of statistics that if they could be shared, I think are like, it would change anybody's mind. And like I think it was just fantastic. So if somehow that can be shared, it was amazing. So I mean, if Rocky's any indication of these 16 and 17-year-olds that we have voting, like, I'm all for it. It was a great presentation. So.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Melissa. And Rocky, if you're able to share that slide deck with me by email, I think you have my email. We'd be happy to share it with people on our follow-up email.
Absolutely, I'll send it to you.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna have us move on to our thank you study committee, Nilesh and Kathy, for your work. And we're gonna move on to our last presentation. We're running a few minutes behind. We have with us Myung Lee, who is the Deputy Superintendent at SFUSD, but he's also wearing a hat and representing the Prop J campaign tonight. So Myung, welcome you here. Thank you for spending time with us again.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yay.
Do you need to share a screen or anything, or are you just going to speak?
So I could share a couple of things, but yeah, to the last couple of comments, I too am very impressed with Rocky, and am humbled that I don't have a PowerPoint like he brought, and I have a couple of visual aids, but for the most part, I was just going to talk.
Yes, please.
But this is a bit of a complicated measure, so let me just start off by saying a couple of things, and then we can kind of see how it goes, and if we want to use visual aids and go into more details. So this measure, first of all, thank you for doing this, and thank you for being so active in the PTA and this extra level of involvement in looking at all these complicated and yet really important ballot measures, not the least of which is Prop J. So Prop J, for those of you who were attentive to what was on the ballot or here in San Francisco in 2018, you will probably recall, especially if you were connected to schools, that there was a parcel tax on the ballot in June of 2018 called Prop G. So I know we just heard about Prop G. This is another Prop G that was a few cycles ago. And that was a parcel tax that was put on the ballot by signature gathering. So citizens gathered a bunch of signatures and directly filed a ballot measure onto that ballot, and it passed by a vote of 61%. And really that measure, the biggest single use of that measure was and is to fund really well needed and well deserved raises for our teachers and other staff, but primarily for teachers and paraeducators. And part of the reason why it was put on by signature gathering was that there had been a legal opinion issued by City Attorney Dennis Herrera that said that an initiative that was placed by citizens would have a simple majority vote threshold to pass. And that is based on a case law that came out a bit before that, the California State Supreme Court ruling, and that was declared by the city attorney to be a simple majority measure. It was passed by 61%, and then several months later, it was challenged in court in San Francisco Superior Court, based on a competing interpretation of case law and the state constitution that said that argues that it actually should be passed, even though it's placed by signature gathering. It requires a 2/3 vote. So it's been litigated since about Thanksgiving of 2018, and the funds have been collected and they are escrowed or impounded. So everybody has been paying the taxes that needs to pay the taxes, but the funds have not been released by the city controller. And so what Prop J attempts to do is to get that 2/3 threshold outright. It was placed on the ballot by Mayor Breed to try to get that 2/3 threshold outright for basically the same uses. The amount is slightly lower, but essentially it's the same uses as Prop G was meant to fund back in 2018. But the amount is about 10% lower than Prop G currently. And if the 2/3 vote is accomplished, then that would replace this other measure that is being litigated with a new measure, slightly lower, and it would let the funds be released and used for their intended purposes beginning next fiscal year, FY 21-22. So that is it in a nutshell, but I'm happy to go into more details if anybody is interested. And I know you're under some time constraints. I see I'm watching the clock too, so I probably took up more than the 4 minutes I was supposed to take.
No, I think you're totally fine. Thank you for that overview. And I know folks voted on this already a couple of years ago, so it's not a completely unfamiliar measure, but it is a new situation that has been confusing for some people. Do I have any questions? You can go ahead and raise your hand in the next to your name, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question, please go ahead.
So I have a question again.
Yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead, Melissa.
So if I'm hearing this right, Prop J and Prop F are both just about like getting funds released immediately, like something like what's happening? Am I correct in hearing this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well,
Welcome to California.
Prop F is pretty is very complicated, and I don't know. Sorry, I wasn't logged on for that conversation, but I'm guessing you got a sense of the multiple moving parts with Prop F. I mean, a piece of that measure, as I understand it, would unlock some funds from the Prop C measures in 2018. So that has a similarity to what Prop J is trying to accomplish, because it's the same constitutional questions that are at issue with all three measures. But Prop F also has other substantive changes in terms of business tax, the business tax structure. So that's a little bit more complicated, in my opinion, than Prop J is. Prop J is really very, very similar to what Prop G represented in 2018. It doesn't have, real substantive changes or really any substantive changes except a slight scaling back of the amount of the tax.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions from Young?
I have a question. This is Terry.
Hi,
Please,
Terry.
go ahead, Terry.
Young, is the 10% to preserve the rights under the original challenge in court? Is that why it was reduced?
Well, I'm gonna be very candid with you, and this isn't really a secret, and I think you'll all understand it. The reduction, the slight reduction, is largely out of consideration that it is two things I would say. One is that there's a 2/3 threshold, right, rather than a simple majority threshold. So this in actuality is a reduction to an existing tax. People are paying this tax. Property owners are paying this tax, and so this is not a new tax. It's not a tax increase. It is a tax reduction. And the fact that it is a reduction of an existing tax, one, would presume would induce some people to be more supportive of the measure than if it were an increase. And then the second reason is really out of respect for the economic challenges that all kinds of folks are facing, as we know, and that includes property owners in many cases. So, in consideration of the present economic challenges and the recession or depression and folks being so hard pressed to make ends meet, that's another factor.
Thanks, Myung. Carrie, you have one more question?
Yeah, this is a quick question because I'm not sure I may have missed this. Does it mean that the money that was in escrow goes to the school district, or are you going to refund that $10 per property owner for the 2 years we've collected it?
That's a great question, Carrie, and this is one of the things that's a little bit hard to really give an elevator speech about. So this measure is really would only affect the taxes going forward. So starting in fiscal year 21-22 and the next 16 years. So a total of 17 years beginning next year. It doesn't have any retroactive or retrospective effect. So the litigation that's underway would still determine the fate of what happens with those funds for the first 3 years that they were collected under Prop G. And if this measure fails, then that litigation would affect everything that happens looking backwards and looking forwards.
Okay.
But if the measure passes, it really only affects what happens starting next year and beyond.
Thank you. Yeah, it does get a little bit complicated. I'm not seeing any other hands, and so what I think, because we are over time, I think I'm going to go ahead and close this part of the presentation. Thank you, Myung, and then allow our study committee to take just a few minutes, if you can kind of briefly summarize.
I can go pretty fast.
Yeah, that would be great, Carrie, if you can give a summary of the recommendation and summary of the authorities, and I will put the study committee report in the chat box. Go ahead.
Okay,
hi. And then we'll vote. Yeah.
So Eric Johnson from San Francisco Public Montessori and myself, who I'm on the Second District Board, we're the study committee. Fortunately, there was a study committee for Prop G in 2018, and many of our authorities remain the same, although there's some that are different. So we have 3 resolutions that give us authorities and 3 position statements that give us authorities. But most importantly, the California PTA legislative platform and legislative planks give us authority, because in our legislative platform, we suggest, as a state PTA, we are always going to advocate for establishment of and adherence to fiscal responsibility in government with concern for fair taxation, but keeping priorities for the needs of all children and youth foremost. We also advocate for strong and broadly based tax structures at state and local levels, which gives us the authority to advocate for local tax initiatives. And then we also always advocate for budgets and financial support to provide needed services for children and youth, and that would be the services that would be provided through the community schools aspects of this proposition. And our legislative planks include secure financing for public education. I don't know what I said there. And I read faster than I talk. And to ensure pre-service and in-service teacher preparation programs, remuneration, supportive services, and professional development, which are all paid for through this proposition. And so we have very strong authorities for supporting this proposition. You guys can read through them at your leisure around the dinner table tomorrow. And I'm hoping that these strong authorities will give us inspiration to support the proposition fair wage for educators parcel tax of 2020.
Thanks, Carrie and Eric.
Did you need any more?
No, I think that covered it.
Everyone supports it. All the supervisors, everyone supports it.
There's pretty broad-based support for it. We did, since we already had a couple of questions when Myung presented, if anybody wants to raise your hand, if you have a quick question related to the PTA authorities, and if not, then I will explain how we're going to go ahead and move into voting. Just watch for a second here. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Oh, thanks, Myung. If anybody wants to see visual aids, Myung, just put that in the chat. Okay, so let me explain how we're going to go about this voting process again. First thing, so we're going to be voting just on Prop F and Prop J, not on G, because there wasn't strong authority to do that. We'll be doing the resolution writing as we explained a minute ago. So Prop F and Prop J. We can vote in one of two ways. We can either do it by everybody raising their hand in the chat box to show that they support, or if somebody wants to request, you can, through PTA procedure, request a secret ballot, in which case I have a Google form that everybody would fill out tonight and that we would just have open for like 10 minutes during voting. But we will only do that if there is a request for a secret ballot. So if anybody would like to request a secret ballot for either one of these measures, can you please raise your hand now? This is just not to vote, just to tell me that you want a secret ballot. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so that makes it easier. All right, so let's just take Prop F first. We'll give anybody the opportunity to speak for or against Prop F. This is the business tax overhaul that would provide funding towards early education. If you would like to, we can take up to 3 comments on either side. So if you would like to speak for it, you can raise your hand and I will peruse the participant list. Nobody is required to speak for it or against it, but if you would like to, please feel free to raise your hand now. Okay, I'm not seeing any hand. Oh, I see a hand raised. Albert, please. Albert?
Sorry, I slipped.
What was that?
I slipped.
It was a mistake.
Oh, you didn't mean to raise your hand?
No, sorry.
Okay. All right, great. So I don't see any hands. Does anybody want to speak to oppose supporting Prop F? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So now what we are going to do is we're going to go ahead and vote. So if what you need to do, so I have to tell you that the way that it looks on my screen, I can't see where the hand raise thing is, but I think it's if you hover over your name, right? Isn't that where you're allowed to raise your hand?
You open up the participant list.
Okay, so if you open up the participant list, if you hover over your name, you should be able to see that you can raise your hand. So all in favor of supporting Prop F, please raise your hand now.
I'm going to presume your hand is raised, Michelle. I can't see it.
Oh, yes, presume, please.
Myung, are you a PTA member somewhere? You can vote.
I don't know if I am. I'm a huge fan of the PTA, as you know.
Not too late.
That's a good nudge for me. I'll sign up.
All right. Anybody else? This is last call for raising your hand in support. Okay. Everybody can lower their hands now.
Did
There's
you
gotta
count
be,
them all, or did you want me to count?
I didn't count them. I didn't count them, but I think.
I did.
Okay, great. So everybody can lower your hands. Well, I'm going to start lowering people's hands if they didn't. Okay. All those who want to vote no on Prop F, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any. And then we normally call for abstentions. Although if you didn't vote, I'm assuming that's an abstention. So.
But some people didn't vote, so let me see if there are any abstentions.
Okay, does anybody formally want to abstain? You can raise your hand now if you formally want to abstain. Okay.
Thank you.
I don't see any there. Thank you very much. So that means that the Second District PTA has endorsed Prop F. Thank you very much. And then we're going to move on. And just to clarify, there would, on Prop G, there will not be a decision to endorse Prop G because there were not enough PTA authorities to do so, as much as it felt in alignment with what a lot of what we have as principles, and values across PTA. There were not clear authorities to do so. So we won't be taking a position on Prop G, but we will send the information out so that people can review that. It's really important that all of our members review Prop G on their own because we want you all to be informed voters. So please feel free to share information of both sides. You can share the study committee report with your members if you'd like to. And so we're going to move on to Prop J. So Prop J, this is the parcel tax that Myung just spoke about. So if you would like to vote yes on Prop J, then please raise your hand. Okay. All right, it looks like they've stopped. All right, you got that, Carrie?
I do, thanks.
Okay, everybody can lower your hands, please.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Oh. Okay. All right, great. If you would like to vote no on Prop J, please raise your hand. Okay. Now, if you would like to formally abstain from voting in either position on Prop J, please raise your hand. Okay. It looks like we have a support position for Prop J.
Yay.
All right.
Thank you
Congratulations, everybody. And thank you all again to all of our study committees who took the time to review the authorities on this issue, on these measures. Thank you all of you who took the time to show up to learn about these measures and to participate in this process. It's a little bit more technical than some of what we do, but it's for me, it's encouraging to know that there have been so much research that have gone into creating all these authorities, and that we take the time to make sure that we're not just speaking kind of on a whim, but that we're really relying on the voice of members to take these positions. So thank you all for participating in that. If any of you are interested in participating in the drafting of the resolution that would support youth voting, which, as I mentioned before, once it's drafted, it would come to the whole district PTA membership before it could move forward to the state. So you'll have a chance to see it. But if you'd like to be part of creating that, please send me a note because we'd be happy to have you participate in that drafting. And so I think that is it for the evening. Thank you to everybody for being here. And then we hope you're able to join us next Wednesday night when we have the coach who's coming to help all of us parents be a little less stressed out during distance learning. So please join us next Wednesday night. And that's it for our night. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.